everyone, and welcome to a new video where I cover a topic that's deeply personal to me. I promised that when I reached 50 subscribers, I would give my presentation on Islamophobia that I previously created as part of a final exam in an Arab culture through film class I took during my final semester at uni. A lot has happened in the past 2 years since then, so I revised it to make sure it is up to date to what's going on now. If you yourself condone the mistreatment of Muslims in the US and Europe or happen to support our country's previous administration, I suggest that you look up a different video on the search bar above and stop wasting my time. But if you're open-minded and wish to hear me out, then sit back and let's get this presentation started. The impact that Islamophobia has on society and how to combat it. On March 15, 2019, in Christchurch, New Zealand, Brenton Qu'ran went to a mosque and opened fire at a congregation. He had wounded up to 51 victims during a Friday of worship, and some died later in critical condition. In the days before the shooting, Qu'ran was notable for possessing anti-immigration sentiments, as authorities discovered when social media profiles under his name had distributed a lengthy racist document that identified mosques that were previously attacked. At the time of his arrest, he brought multiple modified weapons with him, indicating that he wasn't planning to stop at the mosque in Christchurch. Qu'ran would have attempted to attack other mosques had he not been apprehended by police before he fled the scene. All the above factors revealed that Islamophobia, coupled with his support for white supremacy, was his motives. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's response and compassion was applauded by political leaders worldwide. She wasted no time in taking swift action by condemning the shooting as an act of terrorism. She bluntly called a lawmaker's suggestion of a link between violence and Muslim immigration a disgrace and vowed to advocate for stricter gun control laws. Furthermore, she sought to cover the funeral costs and offered financial aid to the victims' families. During her visits to the families of the shooting victims, she wore not only all black robes, but she also donned a hijab out of respect for the Muslim community. Ardern's progressive outlook transcends religion because she perceives New Zealand's Muslim population as its people. She made that part of her perspective obvious when she told the grieving family she visited that, "You are us." According to former First Lady Hillary Clinton, New Zealand enacted a ban on military-style semi-automatic weapons and assault rifles 6 days after the shooting. This decision, demonstrated by Ardern, struck by her word to protect the country's Muslim population and curb future shootings against civilians. Meanwhile, in the United States, Muslim Americans are still treated poorly despite the occasional milestone. Alanah Omar is a Somali-American refugee who got elected into the Minnesota House of Representatives in 2016 and is a member of the Democratic Party. As a result of her victory, she became one of the first representatives of the United States who follows the Muslim faith. She is also the first representative in Congress to wear a hijab. Omar fought for racial equality, access to free education, and protection for the environment throughout her career. Before holding public office, she gained notability for her years of advocacy and activism. Earlier in April 2019, she came under severe scrutiny from multiple conservative news outlets and even the U.S. president when she weighed in on 9/11 during a speech she delivered to the Council on American Islamic Relations. One of the lines from her lecture, "Some people did something," was edited into a 43-second video that President Trump posted on his Twitter feed on the 12th of April. The video in question contained a compilation of footage on the day of the attack and cryptic parts of Omar's speech that made her seem like she was making an understatement of this tragedy. Fortunately, liberal representatives in the U.S. government were quick to stand by Omar because they firmly noted that President Trump and other conservatives were using the video to put words in her mouth. Even as a politician, Omar has been subjected to harassment and hate speech before the videos released on Trump's Twitter feed. She had previously gained attention from the media when she refused to condone a Republican poster that she deemed anti-Muslim at a West Virginia legislative event. She stated that the content drew a comparison between her and a terrorist, giving individuals the impression that it is tolerable to bully her for her faith and ethnicity. The poster in question contains the following captions: "Never forget, you said," and below, "I am the proof you have forgotten." It consisted of two images that reinforced the comparison that Omar had feared. One was of the original World Trade Center when the attack on 9/11 occurred. The second is a portrait of Omar donning a hijab. If we look closely at the context of this poster, we can understand that she had every right to speak up about it for antagonizing her, even if that message was not intentional. Shortly after an altercation over the poster, Anne Lieberman, a House of Delegates member, resigned over an allegation that she said that all Muslims were terrorists, a common sentiment that Islamophobes stand by to this day. On March 21, 2019, Patrick Carliano had made a threatening phone call to Omar's D.C. office. This started an investigation conducted by the FBI in collaboration with the U.S. Capitol Police, which eventually led to Carliano's arrest a week before President Trump posted the misleading 9/11 video on his Twitter feed. Carliano did not hold back his intense resentment for Omar while under questioning as evidence when he stated that he deemed her a terrorist and threatened to assassinate her. He claimed to be a patriot and that if the founding fathers were still alive, they too would kill Omar, similar to how he threatened to do the same. According to the Council of American Islamic Relationships, these statements are obvious examples of both nationalism and extremism. They speculated that Carliano's actions and the scrutiny that Omar has fallen under lately were indirectly encouraged by the currently volatile political atmosphere in the United States. It is also worth noting that the rise of Islamophobia and fascism in the country was due to the Trump administration's reluctance to condemn hate crimes committed in the name of white supremacy. Okay, and this is a big one. On January 3, 2020, General Qasem Soleimani, a prominent military figure in Iran, was killed in a drone strike ordered by President Trump. A statement issued by the Pentagon revealed that he was plotting to attack U.S. diplomats and troops stationed in Iraq. It also asserted that the Quds force under his command had murdered hundreds, if not thousands, of service members beforehand and provided funding for organizations that the U.S. declared terrorists such as Hezbollah. While it seemed like a good idea in hindsight, Soleimani's death created a ripple effect that fractured hope that the United States and Iran will rekindle their diplomatic relationship. For instance, millions of people allegedly gathered in Tehran to pay their respects at his funeral. They expressed feelings of grief and overwhelming resentment toward the U.S. Contrary to how the U.S. viewed Soleimani as a terrorist, most Iranians perceived him as a martyr that had fought against ISIS. They believed that his assassination was a reckless decision because they feared that both countries were now dangerously close to war. Iran responded from withdrawing from the 2015 nuclear accord. Trump stood by his threat to destroy Iranian cultural sites if the Islamic Republic retaliated. Unfortunately, U.S. citizens of Iranian descent are terrified that they will encounter additional Islamophobia should political tensions between both countries escalate. Some victims already reported that they were questioned extensively about their political views by authorities when stopped at U.S. borders. The interrogators involved were likely under the impression that the victims may have been spies attempting to return to Iran, and which is the furthest from the truth. This is heartbreaking for me because a friend of mine from Iran is one of the nicest guys I've ever met, and this is just horrible. Horrible. I cannot condone this at all. What is Islamophobia? In my own words, Islamophobia is the irrational fear of individuals who practice Islam. On the other hand, it is well known for the resentment and bigotry toward this group of people and the faith in general. Dictionary.com defines it as the hatred or fear of Muslims or of their politics or culture. Although it is difficult to detect Islamophobia extensively because it sometimes comes in subtle shapes and forms, like racism in general, it can be recognized from the following characteristics and situations. Strange looks and unexplained discomfort from strangers if the victim has darker skin and is wearing clothing usually associated with traditional Arab and Islamic culture. Verbal or physical abuse that is directed toward the victim. For example, go back to your country. We don't want beep and terrorists here. And sometimes explicit death threats that are obvious xenophobic remarks, typically aimed at individuals who are part of Islamic culture and another minority in general. Comparing a Muslim's abstinence from pork to a vampire's refusal to eat garlic. It is dehumanizing to pretend that pork is a magical object intended to drive them away from their communities. Some hate crimes perpetrated against Muslims involve leaving behind baking strips or a pig's head outside of mosques. For example, in early 2016, a vandal had trashed a mosque in Titusville, Florida, and left bacon on his doorsteps when he finished. This act implied that he held on to Islamophobic sentiments, obviously. What causes Islamophobia? Where does it come from? Anti-Muslim attitudes were thought to have started during the aftermath of the attacks on the World Trade Center, aka 9/11. Immediately after they had occurred, the likelihood that Muslims and immigrants from the Middle East might encounter prejudice increased exponentially. Many Americans felt that Muslims are specifically obligated to assist the authorities with tracking down and eventually defeat al-Qaeda simply because of their faith. Why are Muslims living in Western nations yearn to see Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda brought to justice as much as the next person? To enforce that obligation upon them indicates that they were somewhat responsible for the attacks. It also encourages the assumption those innocent lives are connected to the organization in some shape or form, which is a thinly veiled racist sentiment. Furthermore, survey data gathered since 9/11 revealed that a majority of Americans believe that they are unfamiliar with the texts from the Qu'ran and Islamic beliefs in general. Thankfully, Islamophobia instigated by 9/11 had calmed down the following year, but coverage of future terrorist attacks that mainstream media continues to fabricate continues to shed a negative light on Middle Eastern culture to this day. Islamophobic individuals are often quick to assume that Muslims living alongside them are conspiring to enforce Islamic law on Western society from the inside out. Conservative politicians are especially atrocious for planting seeds of doubt into their audience to manipulate them into believing that Muslim terrorists are disguising themselves as civilians who have their sights set on public office. Once they achieve it, they will use it to dismantle Western values and replace them with Islamic principles. Since most Americans lack Muslim friends in their everyday lives, their only source of information of Islam is through the media. As previously stated, the misinformation that it transcribes reinforce Islamophobia. Impact that Islamophobia has in society. The United States is not the only country where Muslim countries experienced harassment and alienation. Islamophobia runs rampant in other Western nations around the world, such as England, Canada, France, and especially New Zealand. The latter was where the Christchurch shooting took place. Victims of Islamophobia feel so isolated from society in these countries that they believe they cannot adequately assimilate into society without being terrified that they may suffer from verbal abuse for quote-unquote not acting American. Muslims suffer from Islamophobia under the following circumstances in which they are treated differently from their Caucasian peers. There have been countless incidents since 9/11 where Muslim passengers encountered other travelers on board who were afraid of them. As a result, airline staff asked them to leave their flights. An undergraduate Muslim student had dropped out of an aeronautics course because of his peers treated him differently due to her ethnicity. Several Muslim girls had their hijab forcibly removed in public by people who harassed them. For example, at the Perimeter Mall at Dunwoody, Georgia, an unidentified man had ripped a headscarf off a 14-year-old girl while he yelled "terrorist" at her before he fled the scene. Police involved with investigating the situation identified it as an assault. rightfully so. What Islamophobes do not understand, nor do they want to understand, is that Islam is actually a religion of peace, not one of terror. Muslims are accepting of individuals that practice a different faith because the Qu'ran has taught them to be kind to others. Terrorist groups in the Middle East, such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda, are notorious for twisting the Qu'ran to justify their ideology. Islamophobia, when it occurs in an academic environment, hinders potential and could scar a victim or their communities for life. In September 2015, a ninth grader named Ahmad Mohammed was arrested at his high school in Irving, Texas, because the principal and several police officers assumed that a device he built on a Sunday night was a bomb. As an engineering prodigy, he was crafty with building electronic devices from scratch like homemade radios. The device that aroused suspicion at the school, which was a digital clock, was what Mohammed described as just something small as a way to demonstrate his expertise to his teachers. His engineering instructor, as impressed as he was with the device, was deeply concerned that other teachers might not be as supportive. When Mohammed was confronted about the device after it beeped in his English class, he insisted to his instructor that it was not a bomb, but the school district and the officers who were called in weren't convinced. Thanks to a policy that encouraged students and staff to report suspicious behavior to the administration, Mohammed was suspended for 3 days. Oh my God, that's horrible. The charges pressed against Mohammed were dismissed because the police did not have enough evidence to support that there was malicious intent, according to the town's chief of police. The incident nevertheless went viral on the internet, with most people showing support for Mohammed, including then President Barack Obama, who offered him an invitation to the White House. Hillary Clinton also encouraged Mohammed to remain inventive as he was before, while stressing that giving in to fear upsets innovation and pushes society closer toward harm's way. Furthermore, his father rightfully blamed the incident on Islamophobia and filed a lawsuit against the school district, the police department, and the city over racism and discrimination allegation. Unfortunately, 4 years later, on March 2018, Judge Sam Lindsay dismissed the case because the complaint did not contain enough evidence that convinced the court to reasonably believe that Mohammed had received unjust disciplinary treatment from the school. The lawsuit also did not specify how the boys' Fourth Amendment rights were violated. Since these events, Mohammed's family had moved away from Irving and are currently living in Qatar. The scrutiny that Mohammed had faced from local authorities and the school district in Irving revealed that Islamophobia was used as an excuse to justify prejudice toward innocent Muslims. Furthermore, it also frightens the diversity and the stability of democracy in the United States and other Western republics. I swear, the treatment that Mohammed received should be a crime against humanity. This is disgusting. What can we as ordinary people do to fight Islamophobia in our communities? The first step to take when fighting against Islamophobia is to educate yourself about the religion. If you're not already friends with a Muslim or have yet to interact with one, watch a movie produced in the Middle East, such as Wajda, to get a sense of what Arab and Iranian culture is like. Love that movie. Obtaining information from a trustworthy news outlet is crucial to being informed on current events in the Middle East. I recommend the BBC due to its commitment to achieving due accuracy in its articles and the lengths that it goes to document the truth about current events by weighing in on each topic using information and facts. In other words, the BBC is less likely to jump to conclusions. It is imperative to keep in mind that the Prophet Muhammad, the founder of the Muslim faith, was a victim of Islamophobia himself during his lifetime. The way he confronted it was that he remained tolerant, patient, and kind to others while he was on his quest to spread Allah's message. By following Muhammad's example, we start to realize that it is easy to separate bigotry from sympathy, therefore granting us the courage to detect subtle instances of hate speech in everyday life, from viral stories to government propaganda. It's okay to feel isolated from people when you receive that hate as well. Remember that you are not alone in this battle. Misinformed and fearful people will always succumb to Islamophobia. Fortunately, there are many more that condemn terrorism in the Middle East and think positively of Islamic culture at the same time. Bystander intervention is one of the most effective ways to curb Islamophobia. Most of the time, if a Muslim is being harassed or physically assaulted in public, witnesses don't bother to step in to put an end to it for multiple reasons. Most people feel that it is not in their place to intervene, but they may also worry that the aggressor will start to bully them too. Unfortunately, the only way for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. It is no secret that by giving in to fear, they lose their ability to maintain awareness of injustice. Enclosed in the slide is a short comic strip about politely interacting with a victim of Islamophobia and making them feel welcome in society in the process. The story's author hoped that her readers would use it as a guide regarding how to fight Islamophobia in similar scenarios without resorting to violence. Consider the detainment of Japanese Americans in prison camps following the events of Pearl Harbor and severe anti-Semitism in Nazi Germany throughout World War II. Is Islamophobia any different from either of these types of discrimination? My short answer to the question is no, it is not. The long answer would be that all the above comes from the same roots of hatred. The only difference between them is that they are each directed at a different ethnic and religious group. Furthermore, if we equate the word Islamophobia with the same context as we would when we talk about hate speech against Muslims and Islamic culture, it could one day be assimilated into the English language to the same degree as racism. It would not stop Islamophobia right away, but by taking it one step at a time, we can eliminate it in our local communities. A brief reality check on Muslim culture and Arabic phrases to enlighten you. Arabic language as a whole has become atrociously associated with terrorism in recent years because radicalized organizations such as ISIS twisted them into battle cries that an extremist shouts shortly before a bomb explodes out in the open or gunshots fired into the streets. For Muslim Americans, speaking their native language in public arouses discomfort from nearby witnesses because they'll jump to the conclusion that an attack could happen at any moment. If it happens at an airport, the security is worse because the victim could be subjected to additional questioning by the TSA. To get some of us started on putting our fears to rest, here are several factoids about two well-known phrases that Muslims use in their everyday lives and the reason why they abstain from pork. Allah Kulabar, a phrase twisted by terrorists to emphasize that their attacks on civilian lives are in God's name, translates to God is the greatest. It is an essential part of the daily vernacular used by Muslims when communicating with their loved ones. It is also spoken during times of prayer to declare that they are willing to heed Allah's call. Basically, it is the Arabic counterpart to the Christian phrase, peace be with you. Jihad is an Arabic word that translates to struggle, which means a jihadist is someone who endured great peril to repent for their sins. It does not in any way describe a warmongering fundamentalist that strikes fear to the hearts of civilians and desecrates ancient world wonders for the sake of how he misinterprets the Qu'ran. Muhammad especially stated that the best jihadist is one who speaks of the truth in front of a tyrannical leader. In other words, dealing with racial and religious discrimination that Islamophobia wrought upon Muslims in the West and trying as hard as they can to live peacefully in the process is considered a type of jihad. Regarding the fact that Muslims stay away from pork, Islam and Judaism teach their followers not to touch it at all because they say it is unsanitary for people to handle. Pigs spend a great deal of their time frolicking in mud pits and consuming trash to clean up the ecosystems they dwell in. Their carefree habits are why they are categorized as scavengers and are kept as pets on farms. In other words, Muslims are taught by their faith that if they consume pork, chances are they could be eating the dirt that it played in. I'm a vegetarian, so I don't eat pork anyway, and there's nothing wrong with that. In conclusion, while former President Trump, thank God, should not be entirely to blame for the rapid increase of Islamophobia since the 2016 presidential election, His position as leader of one of the wealthiest and powerful countries in the world still hold him accountable for the continuous prejudice against Muslim Americans and other minorities. It is because he was preoccupied with the construction and reinforcement around our nation's barriers without completely understanding the ramifications of doing so. Some supremacists who have carried out violence against Muslims have treated passages from his speeches and tweets as gospel and used them to justify their actions when interrogated about their motives. His administration may likely be slow to condemn large-scale hate crimes because they are terrified that they will most likely lose support from nationalists, such as Proud Boys, and handfuls of conservative civilians that voted him into office. On the other hand, if Trump still wished to live by his campaign slogan to quote-unquote make America great again, the least he could have done is tell it like it is. And here's my works cited. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching this video, everyone. I will include these citations in the description below. And if you really enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It would mean a great deal to me and would help this channel grow. And I'll see you on the next video. Have a good night.